to head into it?
Come on.
All right. Well, good
Get
morning.
away.
Morning.
Good to see your faces. As you may know, my family has moved down to San Diego County at this point, so Thomas could start school up there because we're going to live down there for about 6 months. And so I drove up this morning. Something about driving in the middle of a pandemic early on a Sunday morning. Very amazing how quickly you can get places.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I did it in an hour 40, Gary.
Ooh.
Yeah, not bad.
Yeah, that's about right.
There you go. So I didn't, I don't have any slides. I don't have any hugely formal presentation for this morning, in part because I wanted to kind of invite some conversation along the way. And so if you have a question, a comment along the way as I go through this, feel free to jump in. And basically I'm, in small conversations on the side with people, I've talked a little bit about what all happened to bring me to the position of departing. But I really haven't had a broad conversation about that. And it doesn't really feel like a great sermon topic. So I haven't preached on that particular topic, but I wanted to kind of give you just a little information and maybe talk about just some things about that. And then also maybe tell you about what the new job that I'll be doing entails. And I will say that I have I view myself as having about a 9:30 hard deadline to be off because of getting ready for worship. So, I will keep an eye on the clock as well. So since I discerned a call to seminary, one of the key pieces of my understanding of my call has been ecumenical or interfaith work. One of the things that I was doing when I discerned that call was I was working in conjunction with an interfaith organization that was doing some public advocacy work in Southern California. And so kind of seeing how the church and faith-based institutions could be involved in public advocacy prompted me in some ways to look at going to seminary ultimately. And so when I started in seminary, I wasn't really looking at doing congregational ministry. In fact, I created an internship. Most of my fellow seminarians at the time were doing internships in congregations. And at that point, that wasn't what I was looking at. And so I went ahead and worked out an internship with the Kentucky Council of Churches. So my very first internship was with an ecumenical organization in Lexington. And I worked with them for about 2 years. And then in my third year of seminary, I worked with a congregation and fell in love with congregational ministry. So kind of moved away from that, but always kept a foot in the ecumenical or interfaith world. My first call in Minnesota, I did a few things in conjunction with the local synagogue, as well as worked with the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition of Minnesota, which was a statewide faith-based advocacy organization. And I was on their board for 3 years. And so when I came here, I did some work with South Bay Interfaith. We developed a relationship with Tikvat Jacob, which I kind of dove into pretty deeply. And I also, even before coming here, had reached out to our UCC Ecumenical and Interfaith officer and said, if there's a time when I can be helpful, please let me know. And she took down my name, and about 1.5 years later, I received her asking if I could be the UCC's representative to the Reformed Church in America Synod. And so that started my work with our denominational ecumenical and interfaith branch. I did.
Can I interrupt just a second?
Please go ahead.
Rick, this is being video recorded, correct?
Yes, it is.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
So I did, and I represented the UCC with the Reformed Church in America 3 times, and then I did that once with the Presbyterian Church USA once. And then I was asked if I would take on a more regular role as one of the representatives to the National Council of Churches, National Council of Synagogues, Jewish Christian Dialogue Table. That happened just a few years ago while I was here. And that's a twice a year gathering where representatives from various Christian denominations, representatives from the different Jewish movements come together and have joint conversation around issues of the day, larger issues, and just kind of develop relationships. So it's a group that actually, many of those folks have been together for years, and you add to it kind of a piece. So long-term relationships, trying to then offer guidance to their umbrella organizations, the National Council of Churches, for us to say, here's how we think interfaith engagement with the Jewish community should look over the next year. And we have those conversations once a year. So all of that were things I was doing outside of congregational work at some point. I was aware of the position at the denomination. It's something that always looked interesting, but it's a position that opens maybe once a decade. And it's actually only existed through 4 people. It was created back in the 80s, 90s, I think, 80s. And so 4 people, 3 people to date have occupied the role. I will be the 4th. So that gives you a sense of how long people stay in the position. And I was aware that it became an open position at the denomination officially in August of 2019. The person who was in the position, the Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson, was elected to the position of Associate General Minister of the United Church of Christ, which vacated the ecumenical interfaith position. And so they immediately started a search. At that time, in August of 2019, I determined that it wasn't something that it didn't feel like the right time. And so I didn't get my profile together. I didn't apply at that time. They went through a process. They came to a candidate who just didn't work out. And so the position remained vacant. And it stayed vacant through the end of 2019 and into 2020. And the plan was to start more, as I understand it, in talking to Karen Georgia, they were going to do a more directed, targeted search. They were going to ask people to apply. And so in February, I received a contact from her asking me if I would be interested in applying. And so Elena and I started a conversation of discernment to determine whether or not it made sense to apply, not knowing whether or not I would have any chance to get the position. One of the realities of the United Church of Christ is that the denomination, as you all know, is a progressive denomination that is very intentional about who it hires and feels very strongly about having strong representation on the national staff. And I will say that I didn't feel that me being a straight white male going on 50 necessarily gave me a leg up in our denomination for getting a position. But Elena and I talked about it at length. We determined that it was something that I'd always been interested in and that applying made sense, and then we could make more decisions down the line if things move forward. And so I did put my name in, and then COVID happened and the process essentially stopped. There was no movement on any of it from late February until September. It just didn't, and it was the COVID was happening, and so things were slowed down in general with the national staff deployed, as well as the fact that Karen Georgia Thompson and 2 other members of her family got COVID. and her father died in the process. And so the whole process kind of ground to a halt for a period of time. And then, so that it wasn't even something to even think about at that point. And then in September, it was again. There was contact. And it was fairly rapid. It was, would you, we've got your application. Would you answer these 2 questions via email? And then I did that. And about a week later, they said, we'd like to schedule a first interview. So I did that. And a few days after the first interview, I got a call to do a second one-on-one interview with Karen Georgia. And during that conversation, she said, you're going to be the preferred, the selected candidate. So you should start thinking about whether or not you want to accept it. So all of that happened probably late September into the beginning of October. And so Elena and I had been having conversation at length over whether or not this made sense for me, which would, given my current position here, my ministry in general, if it made sense for her, because obviously it will impact her in some ways, and whether it made sense for our family. One of the reasons we moved from Minnesota to Southern California in the first place, not only because of the 2 wonderful churches, was because we wanted to be closer to family. And my family, of course, as you know, is in San Diego. Elena's family is in Northern California. And taking this position and potentially ultimately landing in Cleveland would take us pretty far away from our families again. And, Thomas has a beautiful relationship with his cousin and his aunt and uncle in San Diego. He has a beautiful relationship, just an amazing relationship with his grandmother. And how does that impact him? And the dog hates snow. And how does that impact him?
It's very low.
He's a very low dog. So I think Elena's basic perspective of it was, in some ways, this is a dream job for me, and that it was important for me to seriously consider the offer, because how often does that happen? And does that ever happen 2 times to one person? And we were looking at, if we were going to make a move, we wanted to make a move to and be very intentional about deepening our roots wherever we went. One of the advantages of the Cleveland area for us, if we land there, is that we have lots of contacts, lots of friends there. One of Elena's closest friends, who is one of her bridesmaids, works on national staff and then lives in Cleveland. And we know a lot of folks through the denomination in Cleveland. I have cousins. My first cousin lives with his family in Cincinnati. So there's folks around. So that offers a landing spot for us. I will say one of the things about the potential move is that we could buy a home. And that's not a financial reality for us here. In Cleveland, it is very real. You can look at the difference in housing costs. And living in the parsonage has been wonderful, but living in a parsonage doesn't really build you equity, and there are some repercussions that come down the line for folks in that case. So we had lots of conversation and ultimately decided that I would accept the position. And then the question was, when do we announce things to whom? Because it's not just a national setting that finds out. It's not just a national setting and the members and friends of Manhattan Beach Community Church, but it also is something that Elena's church has to learn about. And how does that impact them? And so we had a lot of intentional conversation around how we would most effectively announce this in a time frame that worked for folks. So yeah, I embarked not too long after that decision on the joyous process of informing people. I feel like looking back on it, I probably blindsided Nancy pretty badly, because it was a Sunday when Ryan had confirmation. And I said, "Are you dropping Ryan off at the church later today?" He said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Why don't you come on by?" And it was the Sunday before she was to give her State of the Church presentation to you all. And I believe she anticipated that that's what I wanted to talk about. While we did talk about it ultimately, that was not the opening conversation. So that started a process of informing folks, and then yeah, so it's been interesting to see how it has impacted Elena at her church and how people feel there. There's a wide variety of perspective in her church. As I've said, there's no, we're living in San Diego for 6 months at this point. The pandemic continues to cause the national setting to be closed in terms of a physical location. Everyone is deployed, and so what status allows me to stay here. Synod is in July. Synod is a virtual synod, and so there's nothing that impacts our need to pick up and go anywhere anytime soon. We made the move down to San Diego, one, because when I no longer am the senior minister of this church, I no longer can live in the house that the church owns. And so that necessitated a move to a different home. We were able to find a really good situation down in San Diego. And one of the realities for us in San Diego is we have my brother's family close by that we are closely potted with. And so, for instance, last Sunday when Elena and I both came up here and she did some stuff at the house getting ready for the move, Thomas just went and spent the day with his cousin. And that's just not something we have in this area, where we have that family that he can just go spend time with in that easy way. So San Diego really presented itself as a good option for us. And so we made that move down, and he started school at a school down there online. But he got to meet his teacher in person. She felt very strongly about meeting her students before she sees them online. And Thomas is enjoying that and meeting some new people through the screen, and with the hope in February or March or so, maybe having some in-person instruction and getting to know some new friends that way. So he's having a good time. There's a pool where we live, and it is incredibly cold. Other than going in to prove a point, no one has gone in. And it was me who went in to prove a point that I could handle it. It was cold. I don't go in any other times. Yeah, I mean, so that's kind of the nutshell of it. You know, for me, I will say that the challenging piece of discernment for me was whether or not I felt like I was ready to not be here anymore. You know, you all, our congregation doesn't have the most realistic experience of senior ministers, to say the least. Senior ministers in the United Church of Christ, the average ministry is about 7 years. And it's probably that high because of people like John Calhoun, who stretched it up a little bit. There were a few folks in John's generation that had lengthy tenures like that. One of whom is Don Whitcomb, who was at his church in Massachusetts for about 40 years. Elena's childhood minister just retired from that church in Northern California after having been there for 39 years. So there are examples that stretch that number up, but the average is actually 7 years. Associate ministers, the average is about 4 years. So just.
You know what the median is?
I don't know what the median is. It's probably
that sometimes is a better metric because a few outliers can really yank the mean a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I mean, you know, you look at denominations like the Methodists, and they move people every 5. So, you know, having really long-term pastorates is not necessarily the norm. But the question of whether or not one is ready to move is the question. Did I think I had come to a place in my ministry where I felt like I had accomplished some things and that someone following me could continue to move forward in a really positive way. And I feel like I feel like we've done that. In the last 7 years, we have I like to say it, we have called and or onboarded several key staff members, new key staff members. We've got a new business manager in place. We have, who's not new anymore. You've got an associate minister who's come on since. You've got a minister of faith formation who's come on since. The youth ministry position has changed a couple of times. So there's been a fair amount of turnover, but you've got in some of the key positions, you've got really good people in place right now who are fully up to speed and can do their what they are called very well. And so that felt like a good thing. One of the other things we've done is we've had experiences where, looking at what music looks like in worship. We've expanded our palette, I think, a little bit. And in this time of pandemic, we've seen that in a couple of ways play out itself. When before pandemic, we had, our Cultural Arts Board was doing a wonderful job with Frank's leadership, bringing in folks on the final Sunday of each month, bringing in and getting some really great music. Cultural arts has been given a little bit of a reprieve in the pandemic, since every week is special music, and that would just be mean to try to make them do that every week. Plus Pat has been doing a great job getting music together for us in this. But we've had a mix of different people coming in, and right now we have our choir ensemble doing a wonderful job bringing music to us. But I mean, it's the idea of how does the congregation get to know that there are beautiful ways to hear music that may be different from what we always remember. And that, again, I've said in a few places, my dream for you all is to have a service where the music is blended in such a way that all of it is excellent, and that those who prefer traditional music hear traditional music, and because of that are open to hearing something more contemporary that they then can recognize as excellent. And folks who love more contemporary music can hear contemporary music and be open to hearing the traditional music that is excellent, and realizing that those two things can work really well together. One of the things I worked with Rick on at length was developing the Courageous Conversations Ministry. When Alan Hilton from House United came and spoke to us on a couple different occasions, one preaching to us, one with us at a family camp, pitching this idea that a Big Tent church that has perspectives across the continuum is actually a gift, and in itself a mission. That, and let's be honest, in the last week we've seen again, and perhaps in one of the more frightening ways, what happens when we do not allow ourselves to recognize that there are differing perspectives, and we feel that our perspective has to be the one that wins the day. And instead of engaging for mutual growth, we engage to win, and that's troubling. And that's what we see in our nation right now. And the church, I believe, has to be a place where that kind of where we offer the alternative of respectful and faithful dialogue, and people know that they can come and share their perspectives, and they will not be condemned for it. They will be heard, and they will be then asked to hear others' perspectives. And I think this particular congregation is a wonderful place where that can happen, and we've seen it happen in a couple of occasions. But I think it's a real call to mission in a real way, because the church so often is reactive to the culture, whereas I believe the church should more readily lead culture, be an example for the broader culture of those things that demonstrate the ideals of our faith. So I think that's a interesting. And then on a practical piece, yes. Anything? Okay.
Mark, could I just interject something? This is Bill. One of the things that I thought was very attractive about coming to MBCC, for me personally, was that at my last church, the Unitarian Church in Santa Monica, there were approximately 0 Republicans.
We have a few, Bill. We have a few here.
And well, and in that context, I mean, sometimes it's just kind of comfortable. It's like I don't have to. I can just be really relaxed and free and say whatever the hell I want, and it won't make anybody upset. But on the other hand, it's a very skewed view of the world. And so here, if we have to be a little bit, if just because we're immersed in a community that is much more diverse in a political sense, then that makes us conscious of saying, well, I don't want to say something that's going to be terribly offensive to this person who's a friend of mine who I sing with in the choir or whatever. And so it helps us to think about things that are important to us and to try to state them in a context that is sincere to our beliefs, but also make it as accessible as possible to the other people that we care about who have very different political perspectives. So I think that's a really valuable aspect of this church.
It's important. It's an important thing that the church in general can offer. I mean, what we see happening in our broader culture is even, think about the way that progressive Christians reacted when evangelical Christians were in support of Donald Trump. I mean, there was almost mutual condemnation of each group not being, Christian because of which position they took. I mean, that's absurd. It's absurd that we can't have conversation that is respectful and faithful, recognizing that there are faithful perspectives. I had a, being, I don't, I've never shied away from acknowledging it, and it's not a big secret. I am a lifelong liberal. My parents were liberals, and I'm a liberal, and it's who I am. And that doesn't mean I can't have conversation with people who don't agree with me. It makes it hard if the folks with whom I want to have a conversation aren't willing to have a conversation with me. And there's a mutuality that has to be there. But that's one of the things I think that's wonderful about our congregation, is that I think the mutuality is present. And we've seen that in the courageous conversation pieces that Rick has led, that Anne Marie has led. We've seen that play out in a way that's it's really it's wonderful. So I think that, and that's, if I were to make a list of recommendations of things for y'all to keep working on, I think that's a key one. Because I think, when you talk about attracting young families to a church, I think in this day and age, I think families are looking for a church that helps them help their children understand how their faith informs who they are and how they engage the world. And that means actually talking about the things that are happening in the world. Church, for many, can be a refuge and a place to escape, but we have a lot of places we can escape.
Yeah, and the thing is, that one thing that is really troubling to me, and especially in the light of this past week, is there are not everybody, but there are a lot of people on both sides of the political spectrum who thought that the vote was so easy, so trivial. Are you a socialist? Well, if you're not a socialist, then you can't vote for the Democrats. Are you a racist? Well, if you're not a racist, you can't possibly vote for the Republicans. And reducing the entire decision to one word, racist socialist, and that's it. It's like, come on, that's just so unrealistic. It is so unrepresentative of the complexity of the world we live in. Yeah. And so I really hope that we can cultivate those courageous conversations even more, in the future, to try to find ways of talking about hard questions in non-trivial ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a key thing. Straying away from that, the other thing, one of the things we did, which I'm very proud of our congregation for tackling this head on, and it's a much more tangible thing, was the work in the sanctuary this past, in the summer of 2019. I mean, taking on that project and engaging that project quickly and intentionally, and getting the work done in the sound and the lighting and the AV with the screen and so forth, it not only augmented worship immediately for us when we were able to use it, it also set us up, unbeknownst to us, set us up to be able to go quickly into live stream and be able to provide, a quality worship service for folks who, when we couldn't gather in a space. On the very front end of all of it, as people were trying to figure things out, Elena kept saying to me things like, you guys should contact other churches and let them rent your space. You do your worship, then they come in and do theirs, or they come in to rent to record and things like that. And people figured out what they were going to do fairly quickly. Some struggled more, some are doing a lot less. But we were able to, we had one Sunday where I think I just did a Facebook Live broadcast from the chancel. And then the first Sunday we were not able to gather in person. That's what we did. And the following Sunday we had a live stream on YouTube. And it's because of the work that was done the year prior.
And Jacob's knowledge.
It helps. Jacob is very good. But yeah, it was, having the tools in hand to be able to do that was key. I will say that, I felt really good about all those things. I feel like it sets the church up to be in a really great place moving forward. I will say that the pandemic has taken its toll on me in my spirit of ministry, I think. I like seeing your faces on a screen. I do not love preaching to a green light. It is not, I think about like the first, when I served in Minnesota, and Elaine, you will understand this. There's everywhere across the country in the summertime, there is a dip in church attendance. We all know that. In Minnesota, it is incredible. It's like a dive in church attendance. In the church I served, the Sunday before Memorial Day, and Memorial Day was the start of summer for Minnesota, and because of lakes and houses on lakes apparently. And the Sunday before, we had for us, which was like maybe the highest attendance of the year, because we had Confirmation Sunday and we had 150, 160 people in worship. In that space, the sanctuary was packed. There was energy. It felt just amazing. And the following Sunday was Memorial Day weekend. And people had warned me. They said, there's going to be a decline in attendance. We had 40. And it was just, and I expected fewer people. What I didn't fully expect was the impact it would have on me, which was, I never realized how much energy I get from a congregation. You put a lot of energy out leading worship and preaching, but when a congregation is there, you're getting energy back. And what I experienced that Sunday in Minnesota was, after worship, I was more exhausted than I had ever been before, because there was so much less energy coming back. And
Did you say the number was 4 or 40?
40.
40. Okay.
But, and that's, I tell you that because it's kind of that way now. It is putting energy out for worship, and there's nothing coming back. The green light does not respond. And that's hard. And it has taken a toll on me. So I will just, I just name that as a reality of this process of discernment. Because again, we were making the decisions in September after how many months? March, April, May, June, July, after 6 months already. And standing there looking and saying, when might we get back? And not knowing was a hard place to be. Elena has had a very different experience. She loves recording. She loves the idea of they actually pre-record her sermons on Wednesdays, and she loves the idea of being able to do another take. And kind of she worked when she was in college. She did some work she worked for KTLA as an intern for a period of time, and so she's done television, things like that. And so this kind of prompted that memory in her and got her all excited about that. And I did not have the same experience. But it's been good to be able to see people at the outdoor services. It's been good to be able to see people on coffee hours and in places like this and see faces. But for me, what ultimately spoke to me in terms of congregational ministry was the relationships and the community and being able to be together. And that is just something that I have missed so much, like so many of you, I'm sure. So it definitely was an impact on me in terms of decision making. I'd like to say that, the circumstance impacted me, not the congregation. I mean, there are people who will leave congregations because of the congregation, and that's not the case. I am leaving because I'm going to a dream job, and the circumstances definitely impacted my decision making in that. Just to be completely honest about it.
Mark, I'm curious, has our attendance stayed up over the course of these many months, or are people having Zoom fatigue, and is it trailing off over time?
In the last month, it's gone up again. It's never been very low. I mean, there have been higher points and lower points. It's also hard to measure attendance because it's really views, and views are a complicated, Rick could probably tell you all the wonderful things that they've attempted to figure out in terms of, how do we measure attendance and things like that. It's very hard. But, I look at the views, and the views are up right now from where they've been. And that's great. Maybe folks are waiting to see if I'm going to say something crazy in my last couple of weeks. I don't know. When's he going to do it? But probably not today. But please tune in. I might. It could happen. So yeah, I think that's the piece. And the other piece, really, in discerning whether to take the position, the position I'm going to be taking is, the way it's been described to me, is it's kind of like the Secretary of State of the United Church of Christ. You're in charge of protocol and diplomacy and things like that. So I'll work with all the different departments of the denomination, it's the only person who works across the board with everybody, other than maybe the general minister, which, of course he should. And so that's exciting. I think that we are at a time where I would say that, let's see, Mark. John, you have something. You get in.
I didn't mean to, I didn't want to interrupt you, so I was going to chat, but I was going to send you something about a very light escapism TV show called Hot in Cleveland. It ran for 6 years. It had Betty White in it.
Yeah.
It's a fun show. Check it out.
I will.
Sorry for interrupting. I was going to send you. I still don't know how to work chat.
No worries. No, so I think, when we talk about, we just a few minutes ago, we talked about like the role a church can play when it has differing perspectives. I think this position to me represents that on a larger scale. Being the person who is responsible for exploring and deepening relationships with other ecumenical organizations, other denominations, other faith-based organizations, bringing them together, sitting in rooms where that representation is happening and having conversations about how we hear each other and find common ground, coming from different faiths, coming from different ecumenical, denominational perspectives. So the same excitement that gets me excited about doing that kind of work in a local church is the same thing that kind of speaks to my heart about doing it at the national level and ultimately international level. So that's exciting to me. And I think it's given what we see in our nation, I think that faith-based organizations have a real call right now to be working toward a greater sense of unity and helping bring people together as opposed to pulling them apart. And I think it's just a real important work to be done. I'm excited to be able to do it. The other thing that has not really been explored in this position, as I said, there's been 3 people in it before me, and each one has kind of taken their own, has had a priority of their time. And on the outset, I think one of the priorities of my time is really going to be, how do we translate the work of the denomination in these areas to the local churches? Because I don't think it's done very well. And vice versa, how do we lift up and look to the example of what some of our local churches are doing in terms of ecumenical and interfaith work, and help that inform the denomination, but also serve as model for folks across the denomination. You know, there's a church in Omaha, Nebraska that is, I would say it's a community congregational UCC or something like that. I'm not sure, but what I know is that it's a UCC church that's part of a thing called the Tri-Faith Initiative, and the UCC church, along with an Islamic mosque, along with a Jewish synagogue, all sold their property and bought property together, and they share a property and thus share in ministry because they're together, and it's been incredibly successful. And those things are happening on the local level, and you know, unless it's something like that hits the headlines, the denomination doesn't really hold it up in any real way, and doesn't really search out the things. Like, our relationship with Tikvat Jacob is amazing, and we could, as a congregation, help other congregations develop those kinds of relationships just by being in conversation with them and saying, this is what we've done. And it inspires others to do similar things in their areas. I think when we talk about, if for so many of our congregations in our denomination and other denominations, interfaith work, ecumenical work is part of their DNA and a priority for them, they just don't know how to do it necessarily. It's within them. They just don't know how to live it out. We have ways to share our stories, and being in the position I'll be in, that's something I can explore. That's something I can look for and then help lift up and share. So I feel like that's exciting to me, that possibility. So, you know, that's that whole piece. That's kind of been my thinking through the whole time. As I kind of wind down, you know, my thinking is, how do I leave this place in the best position for whomever follows, recognizing that my departure, you know, I gave again in Minnesota, these folks, they were funny. I gave a sermon once because probably about halfway through my time there was still lots of talk about the predecessor and how much she had done and how much she had, been the identity of their congregation. And so I gave a sermon about how the important thing about a congregation, especially in our denomination, in our tradition, is the actual congregation. The people are the most important thing. Because people may come to a church to hear a preacher, but they're going to stay at a church because of the community they find at that church. And the impact of a church is based on how much that congregation is doing in the community, not necessarily what a minister is saying or doing. Only as a representative of the congregation does that make a difference. And I had this one wonderful woman in my church in Minnesota who liked to try to take my sermons and reframe them into a prayer request, because we did the prayer afterwards and people were able to offer prayer requests. And sometimes she did a nice job of reframing. Sometimes she kind of went crazy off and went to a way different direction. And for this particular Sunday, she said she had a prayer of thanksgiving, that because I had somehow described that you want to have the strength of who you are be in the congregation, and her prayer request was thanking God for not having a strong minister. I think she got what I was saying, but I don't know if she translated it well.
How she said not having a domineering or overbearing minister.
Or maybe thanks for having a strong congregation. Hey, that would have been good too. But I think that's what I see here, is that there is such some of you get to work with some of our lay leadership more often than others. We have an incredible team of lay leaders. Before Nancy can say anything nice about me next week, I'm going to tell you she's been an incredible moderator for you all.
Especially now.
Yes.
Yes.
She got to lead one in-person exec board meeting, and then we went virtual. We were in the midst of these big visioning kind of, we're having all these conversations, and it's going to launch us in a new direction, and then it's like, but we can't get together. So to handle a year like that has been just incredible, and Nancy's done a spectacular job. And I mean, she's an example of so many of the lay leaders who've been doing a great job. I see a number of you on the screen. I will not call you all out individually. Only Nancy gets called out individually. But it's amazing what you all do. And I know I can speak for Matthew, that it's what makes anything we do possible.
Yes.
And so, I feel like, some people leave churches because of a crisis. Some people leave churches because of a conflict. That's not the case for me. I feel like I'm leaving the church to take what I've learned here and what I've done here and take it to the national level, and hopefully benefit more folks by taking that learning with me. So that's how I feel about it. I got about 5 minutes or 6 minutes if people have questions.
Yes.
Question mark. So we're in a presidential transition, and the occupant traditionally has left a letter for their successor. If you had to write one for yours, what advice would you give them?
I would say trust the people who are in place in terms of the staff. They are very good. They will do a nice job. I would say really take advantage of the opportunity to partner with the lay leaders. One of the key things that we do is we have a moderator meeting. We call it the MOM meeting. It's moderator, operations board, and minister. We have one of those every month. And while they are, I will say, too long, consistently too long, they are a meaningful thing, because it's the presentation of the opportunity to partner with key leaders, and to be on the same page and know where we would like to all go together, and anticipate where problems are going to be. But I think that's a key piece. The other piece is to just really, in this congregation, one of the greatest gifts of this congregation is the history of relationships. We know that there are perspectives across the board in this congregation, and yet people who I know don't agree politically, I know they don't, vacation together, have meals together, spend time together. Are key people in their children's life, the other one's children's lives. I mean, those relationships are the foundation of the ministries of this church. And it's when we talk about for me, feminist theology speaks to like the centrality of relationship in terms of God's relationship with the people and the people's relationship with one another. And I think our congregation lives that out in some real ways. And the other thing, what I would put in it in terms of a challenge is continue to push the congregation fully as possible into its expressed welcome. To be as expressive as this congregation has been about a welcome is not the norm for communities of faith. And the question must always be asked constantly is, what can we do to be more? We say we welcome all people, no matter all the things. Always challenge yourselves to see where that is not fully up to speed, because that's always going to be the case. Always question it and say, who is it? We say we welcome everyone. Who is it that does not feel welcome now? And what can we do about that? Because I think that's such a key piece of the identity of this congregation. And you want it to be as broad a welcome as possible, and you want it to be absolutely sincere. And when I say you push those points, it's push those points in what are the things we do that limit that? What are the things we say that limit that? What are the things we think that limit that? I mean, it's a never-ending process in our world.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts.
Thank you for asking that. Yes.
Mark, will you have a chance to sing in your new job?
I will have opportunities to preach, without a doubt. And whether or not I sing will depend on the context and the text. If it's there, it goes. If it doesn't, I won't force it.
Hamilton-esque.
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in Cleveland, Mark, and maybe you'd have
Consider that we are now inviting you to come back and preach anytime.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be a little while.
I have to say that I thank you so much for all you've done for our congregation. And I applaud your decision to go where your heart is. But I really
your
your judgment in going back to another snowbound area of the country.
So you're actually moving to Cleveland in 6 months, Mark?
We don't know.
We don't. Oh.
We don't. We don't know.
What about Elena? Will she be able to continue on her job for another 6 months at least, or?
She is still the senior minister of First Congregational of Long Beach, and there is nothing that changes that at this time. It is an unknown
But
fact.
they do know.
They know that I've got a job that
Her church
would be normally based in Cleveland, but because of the current circumstances, it's just not. And when it may be again, we just don't know.
Mark, before we let you go, I just want to say, I'm going to be very emotional in this last week, but also as one of the young family members, what I've been trying to get across to some people is that, to some people in this church, your 7 years might have felt like a short tenure, even though we've now learned it's the average. But I think about a lot of especially our children, and some of our kids have known no other senior minister. Many of our families have known no other senior minister, and you're going to be very, very missed. I mean, we are in great hands with Matthew and Sylvia in place, and I feel very good about that. But there's no doubt the impact that you have had on our families, you formed the Young Dads group, and I think that was so important. And all our children love you and respect you and look up to you, and they all love Thomas. And you're gonna be missed by everyone, but I think the young families in particular, we're really gonna miss you.
Yep.
Here, here.
I don't know how in the back in the day, we'd get in a big circle and hold hands and pray. I don't know how this works. I gotta go.
We understand.
Thank you, everyone, for your
Thank
time.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would hope to, we have plans for some things next week to follow the worship service, including a drive-by. So if you are so inclined to drive by, please do. Elena and Thomas will be with me next week. So we'll all have an opportunity to say goodbye in a socially distant and safe, but still meaningful way.
Will you be at coffee hour today?
I will.
Thank you.
So, all right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So long.
Well,